All right, welcome back to the Balanced Hormones Empowered Women podcast. I'm your host, Abby Vallejo, registered dietitian, certified personal trainer, and health coach. And what I do is I teach women in perimenopause how to balance their hormones, lose body fat, and get more energy in a feminine-based approach that's about working smarter, not harder. Okay, so the topic for today is going to be fatigue and adrenal fatigue and how that causes and relates to weight loss resistance. So I just been feeling really motivated and passionate to talk about this topic lately because I feel like it is such a big problem for so many women, so many humans out there just dealing with ongoing fatigue, sluggishness, low hormones, and then suddenly the things that were working for weight loss are no longer working, right? So you're getting into that weight loss resistance where no amount of dieting or exercise are working, yet you're getting more and more tired. It's taking longer and longer to recover. You have a low mood, you probably have low motivation. So life like that is really hard. It's really hard, and I know a lot of people are suffering from this. I was also in this boat before, so I completely empathize. I know what it feels like to have basically no gas left in your tank when, by all other accounts, you're a healthy person. You should have energy. You're young enough. There's no reason that we should just be falling apart at the seams and be exhausted all the time. But so many of us are. So I want to talk about this because such a big part of this is such a big piece of this puzzle, I would say, this fatigue puzzle that so many of us are dealing with is adrenal fatigue. And now there's multiple things that can cause low energy. Of course, like not getting enough sleep, that's a big one, or having too much stimulation or stress, or having some type of infection. Of course, there's multiple things that can cause fatigue, and the list goes on. But in most all of those cases, one thing that's implicated is adrenal fatigue. So what happens, first of all, what are the adrenals? So I feel like this is becoming more and more of a buzzword. So you might have heard this before. But your adrenals are a gland. They're this teeny tiny gland that sits on top of your kidneys. And they're responsible for making some hormones. And some really important, well-known hormones that they make are cortisol, which is our stress hormone. So everybody's probably heard of cortisol. And DHEA, which you can think of as your stress recovery hormone. It's also a parent hormone to your sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone. So the adrenals are very important, right? And they're very implicated, especially in our modern lives, when we're going through stress. The adrenals are involved because, of course, they're making cortisol and they're making DHEA, which help us handle and deal with stress. So when you hear someone say adrenal fatigue, it really just means that they have imbalanced cortisol and they've been going through this stress cycle so much that it's messed up their body's ability to make adequate cortisol and DHEA. So we're going to get into that today, but I just wanted to kind of lead in with this adrenal fatigue buzzword because this is a thing that so many people have. And so it's implicated in so many different cases of why someone could have adrenal fatigue, like, even if I'm tired due to stress, or I'm tired due to an infection, or I'm tired due to too much stimulation, or I'm tired due to a lack of sleep, the adrenals always can be involved in this because it's going to impact them, right? So let's talk more about cortisol and DHEA, right? So I mentioned cortisol is our stress hormone. We've probably all heard about cortisol, right? Cortisol kind of tends to get a bad rap. We kind of tend to think that cortisol is a bad thing. I want to bust that myth because first and foremost, we could not survive without cortisol. We'd literally die without it. Cortisol is the reason that we can mount any type of response that we do. We literally can't live without it. So cortisol in and of itself is not a bad thing. It helps regulate our body. It helps regulate our body clock, right? It's if you have energy to get up in the morning and get moving and get going, cortisol is the reason why. So cortisol is a good thing. We need it. We would die without it. However, imbalanced cortisol is the problem, whether it's too high or too low. And we'll talk about that and what signs and symptoms of that are. So first and foremost, we need cortisol. We just don't need too much or too little of it. Like all hormones, there is a sweet spot where we want it to be, right? It can fluctuate as cortisol naturally does, but we want it to come back to that sweet spot and follow its natural cycle. So I guess the other thing I want to mention is if you get cortisol tested, which is one of the things that I do when I test hormones, I always test cortisol because they interplay with each other. The important thing to know is that your cortisol levels are going to be different at different times of the day. And that is completely natural. That's how it's supposed to be. That's part of it tying into your circadian rhythm and your body clock, right? So it is influenced by the cycles of light and dark, night and day. So in the morning when we wake up, we're supposed to have a spike of cortisol, a healthy one, not a crazy one, but a healthy one. Of cortisol is supposed to rise in the morning to, like I was saying, to give us that energy to get up, get moving, get our day started, to feel awake and alert, right? That's normal. And then it starts to gently kind of taper off. It gets lower in the afternoon. A lot of people actually get a dip in the afternoon, which is why so many people are tired in the afternoon, that like 2-3 o'clock p.m. dip. And then it gently tapers all the way off and gets really low at night because our body needs to make melatonin, which is our sleep hormone. We need to relax and go to bed, go to sleep. And then it does it all the next day. So what I wanted to say with cortisol is if you go to the doctor and you're like, oh, I want to get my cortisol levels tested to see if they're too high or too low, you need to be mindful of what time of day it is that you're getting it tested. And it also doesn't give you a complete picture unless you're having multiple tests throughout the day and night, so we can see where it's at, where it's supposed to be. If it's supposed to be where it's at in the morning, which is higher, kind of lower in the afternoon, and then lower at night. So like the test that I do for hormones and cortisol, the Dutch test, you actually collect 4 to 5 different samples over the course of a day and night, so we can see exactly where your cortisol is at those different times of day and night. That way we can graph it, and once we have it plotted out, we can see, is this normal? Do you have any spikes anywhere? Do you have any dips anywhere? So that is really important to know. So know that your cortisol levels are not always going to be the same. They're not supposed to. They are supposed to fluctuate up and down. However, within a certain range, right? There's a sweet spot always. There's a range that you want it to be in the morning, a range that you want it to be within in the afternoon, and a range you want it to be within at night. You don't want it to be higher or lower than that. Otherwise, there's consequences, there's symptoms that come with that, right? So what else does cortisol do that's so important? I mean, we know it's our stress hormone, but what does that actually mean, right? So think about it. When we have stress, what do we need to do? Especially primally, like let's go back to our primal ancestors, right? They're faced with like the predator, you know, the saber-toothed tiger example that always gets used. We get a spike of cortisol, fight or flight, right? Because it's supposed to mobilize us. It's literally the fight or flight. Are we going to fight or are we going to flight? Are we going to run away? And so the way that it mobilizes us is that it releases stored blood sugar. It raises our blood sugar and releases it so that we have energy. It's like that quick instant energy. That's why when you get like a, an adrenaline rush, it's like, zzz, you almost feel like you're buzzing with energy, especially if you don't move. But because it's meant for you to move, right? Whether you're going to run or whether you're going to fight, it's a very primal response, and our bodies still work the same way. I'm always saying our technology is new, our bodies are not. Our bodies are still very primal. They still respond the same way that they have for thousands and thousands of years. So we have this cortisol spike, and that's to mobilize us. It's to get us into action. Keyword being action. So if you get really, really stressed and you just sit there, it's not good for your body. You're actually supposed to get up and move because that's what it expects you to do. That's why it mobilized all this blood sugar so that you can actually mount a physical response. They weren't answering stressful emails back in the day, right? It was a physical response that we were having. So we get this raise in blood sugar. We get a boost of adrenaline. Why? Because it raises our blood pressure, because we need good blood flow, good circulation to be able to run, to be able to fight, to be able to mount this response. Everything that happens is conducive to that type of situation. So we get more alert, right? You guys ever get scared in the middle of the night? Like maybe you're home alone and you hear noise and everything's dark, and suddenly your hearing is like super heightened, and all the noises that you normally never notice, all of a sudden you're like, wait, what's that little noise? And what's that little noise? That's because your cortisol is elevated and you have a higher sense of alertness. So that is all supposed to happen. It's how humans have survived for thousands of years, especially back in the day when, we had more predators and things like, primal dangers that we were facing. However, it also suppresses our non-vital for survival functions. What do I mean by that? Well, it doesn't really matter to your survival if your skin and tissues are getting, repaired and looking nice, right? You're not really going to be caring about growing hair or burning fat or digesting your food properly, right? So basically, when cortisol goes high, it also has this effect of suppression on the other branch of your immune system, which means it suppresses your immune system. It suppresses your digestion. It suppresses all of those non-vital functions. So that's why you can get digestive upsets when you have high levels of cortisol. You won't digest things properly. If you're in an extended, stressful situation, hair can fall out. You know what I mean? Like, we can see these physical responses because our body is always prioritizing survival, immediate, primal survival, and it's not prioritizing rest and repair as much as it prioritizes survival. I'm always saying this, and I feel like this is such a revelation to humans sometimes, but when you realize it, it makes so much sense. We are optimized to survive, not to thrive. Mother Nature doesn't really care if we thrive or not. She cares if we survive, right? Mother Nature doesn't really care if your hair looks good, or if your skin looks nice, or if your nails are nice, or if your belly is flat, right? What she cares about is that you survive. And surviving is not the same thing as thriving. Those are kind of two different modes. And so we almost kind of have to biohack ourselves as modern humans because we are so incredibly wired to survive that it gets in the way of us thriving. Thriving is a conscious decision that we have to make. And we have to build a lifestyle with the proper tools to help us to thrive. And that's part of what I do, right? Absolutely love doing that. That's part of why I'm educating you about this. So you know, you can't, and you probably know this already, you can't just live your whole life in survival mode. You're going to be miserable and your health's going to suffer for it, right? We also get more frequent infections, like people who are getting sick all the time because they're stressed. It's a thing. Your immune system is suppressed, right? Because your body is so focused on survival. It's more worried about running away than it is from the infection. It's always going to have to make a decision. What is the most vital? Am I going to worry about a virus, or I'm going to worry about the saber-toothed tiger in front of me that I have to run away from? Well, the saber-toothed tiger was more of an issue, right? That was more of an immediate issue. And here's the thing. Your body, your brain doesn't know the difference from, say, you're driving in traffic and you get stressed, or you get an email that you didn't like at work, you get stressed. Your body is still going to release the same stress chemistry as if there was that saber-toothed tiger in front of you. Just so you know, it cannot tell the difference. Okay, so we talked about cortisol. So we need cortisol, we just need it in the proper amounts, but we do need it to mount a response, right? Cortisol mobilizes us, it allows us to react. Then we also have the stress recovery hormone, which I mentioned, DHEA. So DHEA modulates cortisol. They balance each other, right? So if cortisol is our stress hormone, DHEA is our stress recovery hormone. It helps stabilize our mood. It helps enhance our immune function. It's neuroprotective. It protects our brain. It helps with tissue repair. So DHEA is anti-aging. It's also a parent hormone, as I mentioned, to estrogen and testosterone. So hormones are made in a cascade, right? That starts with the raw material of cholesterol, actually, which then goes down the cascade and gets made into other things. One of the things it gets made into is DHEA, and from DHEA, then it gets made into either estrogen or testosterone, and so on and so forth. So, well, actually, it gets made into testosterone, which gets made into estrogen, and so on and so forth, if you're going to be picky about the actual order that it goes. But they balance each other is the whole point. So let's talk about what happens when we have that trigger, right? So now, like I said, we always use, when we're talking about fight or flight, we're always like, oh, the saber-toothed tiger. Your body's going to react the same way, whether it's a real, actual predator coming to kill you or not. So it could be physical. So maybe you had an injury. Maybe it's not anything negative. Maybe you're just exercising, right? You're doing some intense exercise that's going to temporarily spike your cortisol. Maybe it's emotional. So something happens and we get angry or we get anxious or we get afraid, anything that like triggers a heightened emotion. And it could be environmental. So it could be things like you hear a loud noise, right? When we usually jump when we hear a loud noise, we're kind of like instinctually programmed that way. Or an extreme temperature, like if it's really hot or really cold, this can cause a spike in cortisol. So step one, you have your trigger, right? Trigger, brain perceives trigger. Now you have a part of your brain called the amygdala. I don't like to get too complicated here. I like to make things nice and simple. So I like to think of the amygdala as a guard dog. I'm like my dog Marley. She's such a guard dog and she's always barking at everything and she takes it so seriously. So amygdala is like Marley. She's like my guard dog. And anytime she's always scanning for threats and danger. Even when there's nothing, you can trust me, Marley is at the window watching. Even if there's no one on the street, no one in the yard, nobody outside, Marley is always watching because she's like the amygdala. So you have your trigger, your amygdala perceives it, it starts barking. Threat, 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 right? Then that sets off a whole cascade from your brain, sending a signal down to your adrenals. Remember your adrenals, the gland that makes your stress hormone, which is cortisol, saying, hey, we've got a stressful event. We need some help. Release cortisol and DHEA so we can respond appropriately. So that's what the body does. Releases cortisol, you get a cortisol spike right away because you need to what? Respond immediately, right? You need to mount that physical response. Then, let's say best case scenario, a healthy stress response, you still get that bump in cortisol, you respond appropriately, the stressful trigger goes away, and then DHEA comes in. So DHEA is present from the beginning, but it's much slower to rise. Cortisol will spike right away. DHEA is kind of a low and slow. It comes in more towards the end to taper off that stress response and switch you back, helping you to recover from that stress-induced situation, right? So it helps stabilize and balance your mood. It helps modulate the cortisol. Cortisol is, like I said, we need it to survive, but too much cortisol can cause inflammation, right? So it's actually anti-inflammatory in the right amounts, but too much cortisol can cause inflammation. That's why if we're in a period of prolonged stress, we can get inflammation in our body. So the DHEA comes in to counterbalance that, to make sure we don't get inflammation in the brain, to make sure that our body can rest and repair, and we get that tissue repair, which is why I said it's anti-aging. So we can still produce our sex hormones, because when people go through long periods of stress, they get depleted in their sex hormones because their body's so busy making cortisol, diverting all that raw material to make the cortisol, it puts those sex hormones on the back burner, right? So that is how that happens. So you're supposed to have cortisol. Both cortisol and DHEA get released in a healthy stress response. We are supposed to have a healthy stress response. We react, the trigger gets removed, the stress gets resolved, and then we balance back out, right? We come back into balance. So we're in balance, we get the spikes, they come back down, we rebalance. That's best case scenario. That's what's supposed to happen. But now, living in our modern world with constant stressors and just living at this very fast-paced life that are, we're not really evolved optimally to handle, but we have created, we have ongoing chronic constant stress. Most people do. So that stress, when it doesn't get resolved and we're in that state of heightened cortisol response again and again and again, that can become chronic, right? And so often we'll have lower levels. I see this all the time when I do hormone testing. Cortisol levels will be high and DHEA levels will be low because they've been in this state of chronic stress. Their body is pumping out cortisol, cortisol, cortisol. They don't have enough dedicated to make enough DHEA, so their DHEA is low. Therefore, they can't modulate their stress response. Therefore, they're having trouble getting out of that fight or flight situation. See that all the time. So that can become chronic, ongoing, and that is not sustainable, right? And I always like to give people the example of like gas in your gas tank, because most people drive a car, most people understand that. Pretty easy example. So you want to have the right amount of gas in your tank. You don't want to have too much that it's overflowing. You don't want to have too little that your car is about to stop, right? And so what happens is when you are in an ongoing chronic stressful situation that does not resolve, or say it's not even just one situation, but there's just so much stress coming at you all the time that your body never feels like it can adequately recover, eventually your body is not going to be able to sustain pumping out those high levels of cortisol because that comes with an energetic cost. Nothing is free. The body has to make everything, right? That has to be produced. And so just like gas, eventually your gas tank is going to run low and you're going to be on E. So that's where I want to talk about, because I hear this a lot from people. They'll say, well, oh, my cortisol's low, but isn't that a good thing? Like, I don't want my cortisol to be too high. Isn't that bad? I want my cortisol to be low. And I say, I get why you're saying that. You want your cortisol to be in the sweet spot in the middle. If it's too high, you're having a heightened stress response. And if it's too low, what's happened is it's the tail end of the heightened stress response. You've had high stress for so long and your body's been pumping it out. Now all of a sudden, you don't have any gas left in the tank. because you've been revving it up, revving it up, revving it up, and now suddenly you burned out of fuel and you're done. And so basically that is a spectrum. So let me walk you through what that spectrum looks like. And I think this is why sometimes it can get a little confusing, because you have different symptoms at different ends of the spectrum. So this is the spectrum of cortisol imbalance. It's also the spectrum of adrenal fatigue. So when you are first starting out, and it's more of the acute, now acute just means instant, like what's going on right now. It's not cute. I'm always like, what does acute mean? Acute is what's happening right now. So acute is current, chronic is long-term. So when you hear those medical terms, that's what that means. Acute just means this is going on right now. You're having active symptoms. If you're having an acute infection, that infection is happening to you right now. Okay, so what's going on with cortisol? When you have the stress response and you're in the thick of it, right? You're in that stress response. You're probably wired, right? You got that adrenaline. You're getting mobilized, that blood sugar is kicking in. And that feeling can linger on, right? If you continue in that state of heightened stress, and I'm sure we've all been there where, suddenly there's days when you're not sleeping and you just can't relax and you're getting anxious and, insomnia. You might even have some panic. Blood sugar issues, right? Because your blood sugar is continually being raised to try and sustain this, this quick energy, this mobilization that is not meant to be sustainable for long term, but your body's calling on it. You get immune suppression, as I mentioned. You get suppression of your digestion, so you're not digesting and absorbing properly. You start getting belly fat because high levels of cortisol will go right to your belly. So when you see someone with like love handles and belly fat that's all jiggly right in that area, that is called the cortisol belly. It goes right there. Sugar cravings, which doesn't help the belly, does it? Because you're probably starting to crave sugar when this is happening, because you need that quick energy to respond, right? It's all about the real, the primal things that are going on underneath. And then you're probably getting high blood pressure, right? Because you're stressful, you need that adrenaline, you need that blood flow so that you can fight or flight. That is that's the acute phase. That is like you're knee deep in the stressor. So you're wired. High cortisol. So if we tested your cortisol at that point, it would be high. It would be spiking. It would be peaked, right? Too high. Now, if you continue on down that road and you don't get a resolution in your stress, whether in that same situation or you just have other situations that are hitting you and your body keeps responding as stressed accordingly, you get to this midpoint where you're kind of wired, but now you're tired. Tired and wired is what I like calling it, because you're starting to feel more tired, but you're still kind of wired. So you're kind of at the midway point here. Some of these symptoms might be shifting. Now, as we go further to the other end of the spectrum, we get tired and then we get exhaustion and fatigue. So where in the beginning you were wired, you probably had a lot of energy because you were running on adrenaline and you were like, and then you got to the middle and you were like wired but kind of tired. Now you're not wired anymore. When you get to the other end of the spectrum, you are just full on tired, and this is where you don't have any gas left in the tank. So you fatigued, you get exhausted, you could probably sleep all day. No amount of sleep is enough. Like you sleep for 9 or 10 hours and you wake up and you're like, I could keep going. I don't feel refreshed. I didn't feel like that was enough. And that just keeps going on and on and on. You're probably craving coffee and living on caffeine, craving salt. So you can still be craving sweets. It is a little more normal to crave sweets in the more acute phase. And then that kind of passes on to craving salt, because your adrenals need salt to be healthy. So if you're craving salt, you're probably exhausted. Inflammation, joint pain can be happening. Start feel creaky and achy and just inflamed. Low libido, because of course your body's not going to be prioritizing you having sex at this point. It's definitely not. And if you don't have any gas left in your tank, you don't have any gas to make your sex hormones either. So at this point, people's libido and energy and motivation are pretty darn depleted. This is often where I hear women say, I feel so bad, but I just don't even care about sex anymore. And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just depleted. You don't have any gas left in your tank. The good news is we can refill it. Low blood pressure, right? And probably frequent infections, because your immune system has been suppressed for so long that you're more prone to getting sick. And you often see this, like when you've been through a lot of stress and, like instead of getting sick never or once a year, suddenly you're getting sick 2-3 times, or it seems like you're catching every bug that's going through, right? So That is the spectrum. And that's why sometimes it can be a little challenging to understand when someone says adrenal fatigue. It really depends on what end of the spectrum, where you're at on the spectrum. We would actually kind of treat it slightly differently depending on where you're at. So we can pretty much assess that through symptoms, or like I said, I use the Dutch hormone test because it tests your cortisol. That will give me the curve, and I'll be able to see what's your output. How much output is your body doing in terms of cortisol? And they're coupling that with your symptoms. I can say, okay, yeah, your cortisol is rock bottom low. Oh, you're fatigued. Okay, well then you're on that end of the spectrum. You have adrenal fatigue. Now we can do the things to replete that and build your energy reserves back up. So before I talk about that, I just want to mention this is where weight loss resistance comes in. And this is what I see in so many women and men too, but since I mostly work with women, they're like, I'm so exhausted and I drag myself up off the couch and I go to the gym and I force myself to work out and I do those HIIT workouts that everyone says you're supposed to do to lose weight. And I've been cutting carbs and I've been doing this and that and watching my diet, and these stubborn pounds just won't come off. And what does just about every woman think? There's something wrong with her, right? And that she needs to push herself harder because she's not disciplined enough. Right? Am I right? That's pretty much how we treat ourselves, right? And I want to say that no, stop punishing yourself. So if this is you, or if you're headed down that spectrum, you'll get to a point where you'll have weight loss resistance and no amount of exercising or dieting is going to work. Why? Because your body is in pure survival mode. Do you think that losing weight is conducive to your survival? If you lived back in the day, would losing weight be conducive to your survival? Think about our ancestors who faced famines and food shortages and didn't have, grocery stores and restaurants and things like convenience everywhere. Would they have been better served with a little extra weight to help them survive? Yeah, absolutely. So when your body is in a survival state and you push it, it's going to hold on to weight. It's not going to want to let that go. So what we have to do is we have to heal your adrenals. We have to get you some energy back. We have to help your nervous system feel safe and realize that it's not in a life-threatening situation of imminent danger before it will be willing to let go of that weight. So if you have adrenal fatigue, stop with the intense exercise, please. Stop with the intense dieting. You're only shooting yourself in the foot. That's only making it worse. So this is a huge part of what I do in my practice, what I teach. And so this brings me to, I have a new course that's coming out on January 13th of 2025 this year. It's called Get Your Energy Back, which is a really simple name for basically what are the ways that we lose energy. And then I actually pulled, so everything I just talked about today, I pulled from part of what I teach in that course about, what are your adrenals, what's adrenal fatigue, what's the cortisol imbalance spectrum. And then we go on to teach how your hormones are implicated in that. So what does that mean for your sex hormones? How are they involved in low energy, low motivation, low libido? We're going to talk about, I have a hormone quiz for you in the class, so you can take a quiz to see if your hormones are in balance. I'm also going to talk more about testing, so the Dutch hormone test, which I mentioned. How do you test your sex hormones and your cortisol? Then we're going to talk about mitochondria. So if you think back to, you probably learned about this in high school, right? Your mitochondria, your cellular powerhouses, but they are absolutely implicated in overall how much energy we have in our bodies, and the way that most of us are living and modern life are absolutely detrimental to our mitochondria. And there's some things that we're pretty much all doing that absolutely kill our mitochondria. I'm going to teach you what those things are and how to change that so you can actually be building more. You can actually build more mitochondria. We tend to lose them as we age. You can turn that around and you can actually stimulate growth of new mitochondria. So you don't just have better functioning mitochondria, you actually have more, and that really helps your energy. So I'm going to teach you the secrets for that. And biohacks. So how do you actually, what are the actual things? Because I don't want you to just have the knowledge. I want you to get the implementation, because so often this is the age of information, right? We are just overloaded with information, but I want you to know what to do about it. What are the things that are going to actually positively impact your life that you can start doing today? I'm going to teach you those. And then we're going to go over energy drains, things you think you should be doing, but you shouldn't, and what to avoid. So we are going to dive into all things related to energy, hormones, weight loss resistance, and how you fix it so that you can get your energy back, you can get your life back, you can get your libido back. So I really hope that this is helpful. If you are dealing with fatigue, if you have been walking around just kind of feeling more like a robot than a woman, and you're kind of just pushing through, and you're like, where did my spark go? Where did my appetite for life go? Where's my energy? How come I don't want to have sex with my husband? Like, who am I and what happened to me, right? If any of those apply to you, I highly, highly guarantee I made this class for you. Because I have been there and I've healed it, and I'm going to teach you everything I know and everything that I teach my clients in my private one-on-one sessions so that you can heal this for good in a sustainable way. No coffee needed, no exercise needed, right? In a sustainable way so you can literally build a lifestyle to get your energy back, keep it in a life that I know doesn't slow down. Because you're probably not going to be able to get time off, right? Things aren't going to slow down for you, but there's still things that we can do to get your energy back, get your libido back, to make you feel like a real woman again. Trust me, I know. Been there, done that. Let me teach you what I know. So if this has been helpful, please share it with other women in your life. It really, really helps this channel to grow. And until next time, thanks for tuning in. And I will have the link to the course below in the description. See you next time.